Hey everybody, Gary Edelman, American Battlefield Trust. I can't believe it. I know I say this a lot. First of all, I can't believe it's 2023 already. I can't believe it's Gettysburg 160, and I can't believe I'm actually standing where I am right now on Gettysburg 160, just one day before the anniversary of the Battle of Little Round Top. And I can't believe what we're about to show you as well. We've got a couple of objects on this hill right now with our friends from the West Point Museum that I hope will blow you away. And yes, we're going to make you wait a little bit to see these. So we hope you'll share this with your friends. We consider this an especially special experience. But before we can get into the fighting, the objects, the hill itself, let's hear from Chris Gwynn, who works for the National Park Service, who has allowed us to come up here today. And it was not a super easy process to secure access while this place is closed. Chris?
Well, thank you, Gary, and thank you to everyone watching. As Gary alluded to, Little Round Top is currently closed. So what we're doing up here this morning on the 160th anniversary of the battle is a sneak peek just for the viewers of the American Battlefield Trust to talk a little bit about the history that was made on this hill, some of the amazing objects that Gary and team will show you, and most importantly from my perspective, the work the National Park Service is doing to rehabilitate what is arguably the most iconic location on the Gettysburg battlefield. So as you may know, Little Round Top is one of the most visited spots in Gettysburg National Military Park. We conducted what's called a visitor use study a few years back, and that study estimated that of the about 1 million people that come to Gettysburg every year, well over 90% of them visit this hill, visit Little Round Top. I think the reasons behind that are obvious. They want to come and they want to connect with the history of this amazing place. They want to see the boulder where Gouverneur Warren stood on July 2nd, 1863. They want to go walk in the footsteps of Joshua Chamberlain in 20th Maine. A lot of this, of course, is propelled by popular culture. The movie Gettysburg, the novel of Killer Angels, has made Little Round Top, again, one of the most famous places, not just in Civil War history, but in American history. And of course, you have this beautiful view behind me that overlooks much of the battlefield. And if we had been up on this hill on the morning of July 1st, 1863, 160 years ago at this moment, well, maybe we would have seen the men of the 1st Army Corps moving down the Emmitsburg Road. You might be able to see the red Kadori barn, not original to the war, but a great landmark for us to look at today with the 3 white spires rising above the tree line, elements of John Reynolds' troops moving across field towards the scene of battle over on McPherson's Ridge. So it's a great spot to be at. It's a great opportunity for us, the Park Service, to talk about the work that we're doing. Little Round Top was just being loved to death. The hill was suffering from erosion, from soil compaction. A lot of the historic breastworks that were built by the men that fought at this battlefield 160 years ago were being toppled over. There was a lot of work that we needed to do. So last July, we closed the hill. And since that time, we've made tremendous progress on rehabilitating this hill. As we explore the summit today, you're going to see new paths that the National Park Service has put in that blend with the kind of organic nature of the hill, that look like they belong on Little Round Top. You're going to see breastworks, defensive works like the ones just behind me that have been restacked using historic photographs and primary source material to help inform the work that we're doing. And virtually all of this stone was found on site. So we're bringing back these elements that have been neglected and damaged over the decades and centuries. You're going to see new gathering areas that the Park Service is putting in so that if you come to Little Round Top with a battlefield guide or on a group tour, you have space to safely take in the history of the hill without destroying the very thing that we're all here to commune with. I think there's been a lot of concerns about the work being done on Little Round Top. People don't want it to look overdeveloped. They don't want to get to this hill and have it look like something that's been manufactured. And I think what you'll see today on this live stream, in addition to some amazing artifacts and some great history, is the care that this team has done in undertaking this project. Now, this work would not have been possible without the support of organizations like the American Battlefield Trust, our good friends, the Gettysburg Foundation, and everybody that cares for this amazing place. So over the next few minutes, I'm excited to highlight some of the work that we've been doing alongside my colleagues, Doug Dowds, Gary Edelman, Chris White, and some friends from the West Point Museum who are going to bring the story of Little Round Top to life 160 years ago. And with that, I'll bring in Gary.
Thanks so much, Chris. There is so much going on. There's a lot of y'all watching on YouTube already. Really great to have you here with the American Battlefield Trust on Little Round Top with some special objects and experience coming up here. But we still have to set the stage here. By the way, we already have 2 countries from Australia. We got the UK. We've got, and in this country, we've got Illinois, Gettysburg, New Hampshire, all over the place. Now the latest, Andy Hunt is from Smithfield, Virginia. And I think I know you, man. Let's bring on our good friend now, Doug Dowds, Colonel Doug Dowds, U.S. Army War College, licensed battlefield guide. Man, tell us a little bit about Little Round Top, and we're so glad you're up here, man.
First of all, thrilled to be here. Welcome to the 160th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. So let's kind of put this in context. Remember, July 2nd, 1863, 2:30 in the afternoon, not a whole lot's happening. We're at the end of the Union fishhook line. In fact, from here, we can look up, you can see the domed monument, it's a Pennsylvania monument, and just to the right of it, that group of trees is Cemetery Hill. So that's the bend of the fishhook, and now we're at the end of the shank. Remember, the Union 3rd Corps, commanded by Major General Dan Sickles, is supposed to be lined up from the domed monument to here. At 2:30 in the afternoon, he's going to move his corps 3/4 of a mile in front of the rest of the Union line. So starting at the red barn that Chris pointed out, the Gouverneur barn, to the second red barn, to the third red barn, and at the peach orchard, that line's going to bend 90 degrees, come through the wheat field, and end over on Devil's Den. Now, of course, George Gordon Meade's only going to learn this about 3 o'clock. By the time he learns about it, it's too late. Confederate artillery has already started a fire in support of their attack. Meade's going to ride out and find the 3rd Corps out in the peach orchard. He makes 4 quick decisions, first of which is the 2nd Corps needs to try and close the gap on the right. He's going to send a note to his chief of artillery, Henry Hunt, to bring some of those cannon from the artillery reserve out here to support that advanced position. He's going to send a note to his 5th Corps commander to support that advanced position. And then the last note he's going to send is to his chief engineer. It's him. This is Major General Gouverneur K, or Brigadier General Gouverneur K. Warren, and yes, that's an awesome mustache. He is sent up here to tell me what I've missed. You can imagine now, Gouverneur K. Warren arrives up at this high ground. He's going to look out across the field, and what he realizes to his horror is the Confederate attack coming from that far tree line is never going to hit the end of the Union line. In fact, the end of the Union line is down on that crag of boulders down there, what we know as Devil's Den. As Warren looks out and sees that first part of the Confederate attack is going to arrive here, he looks out and realizes those Confederates have come a long way. Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit how far they've come?
Thanks, Doug, and great to be out here, and thanks for setting up this part of the attack. Oops, there we go. All right, so I wanted to share a quick eyewitness account that is published after the war, but it's by an officer who's here. So it's Captain W.C. Ward. He's in the Company G of the 4th Alabama Infantry, and they are getting ready to make this attack that Doug's going to finish telling us about in a moment. But he describes the march of this unit to Gettysburg, and he'll later write, "We had already marched 24 miles, and we're still marching. We're still marching 2 or 3 miles further in view of the Federal Army crouching along a mountain ridge. Apprehending that we would be immediately ordered into battle, water details were sent out, each man carrying a dozen canteens. After making a wide detour, the only water we could find was a little pond, where, gathered at the water gap, it was quite hot and greenish, the remains of the spring rains. With the canteens filled, we began making a double quick to catch up with the marching army. Did you ever undertake to catch up with men moving away from you? This was found to be a very difficult undertaking. At last our places were reached, the canteens were distributed, and our guns returned to us. Gasping and faint with weariness, we still moved to the right of the army. At last the division was halted on the first foothill west of Little Round Top, and immediately the men lay down in line. From this position the hill declined rapidly into a valley along the foot of the mountain. In front of us no living thing could be seen. How vivid the whole picture comes back. As we lay there making these mental notes, the soldiers overheard a comrade say, 'Boys, we're going to have a battle.'" So having marched many miles, having not great water in their canteens on a hot day, these Confederate troops get ready for their attack. Doug?
Well, and Warren recognizes this is now the point of crisis. This is a key piece of terrain on the southern side of the battlefield. So he's up here with 3 of his aides. The only thing up here at the time is a signal station. Now, as he sends out those aides, who they're going to run into is really the first part of the Union 5th Corps coming over to this side of the field. At the time, the lead brigade is commanded by this man, Colonel Strong Vincent, a Harvard lawyer from Erie, Pennsylvania, who, having asked for what is those orders, and he goes, "Well, I'm looking for General Barnes." He said, "Well, he's in the wheat field. What do those orders say?" "I need your division commander." He goes, "I know. What do the orders say?" And finally, the aide will hand him the orders and says, "We need a brigade up on this hill." And Vincent will say, "I'll take those orders." Now it's a race to get up here. Vincent's going to bring his men up around the backside of Little Round Top and now line them along the face. All 4 regiments, the 20th Maine, the 83rd Pennsylvania, 44th New York, and the 16th Michigan, arrive with 5 minutes to spare. No time to build these stone walls yet. Now, a couple things happen for this Confederate attack. First of all, because the first part of the Confederate attack has to go up and over Big Round Top, it slows down. The other thing, because Devil's Den is a little further west, actually the second part of the Confederate attack hits Devil's Den first. Think about the 5 regiments going up and over Big Round Top, hearing the fight taking off to their left, are going to take their N2 regiments, they're going to careen down the northern face of Big Round Top and slam into the southern face of Devil's Den. If you're keeping track at home, 2/5 of the combat power for the Confederates just left this fight. Of course, we often talk about, some people describe this as 3 attacks, some people say it's 6. There's not a lot of distance between where the Union line is and the saddle between Little and Big Round Top. As the Confederates make their way around, of course, we know that ultimately on the very left of the Union line, Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, eventually low on ammunition, will order a bayonet charge, and that will secure the very left of the Union line. However, over on the right, things aren't going that well here either. The 16th Michigan is a rather small regiment. Also, the 4th and 5th Texas will careen off of their attack from Devil's Den, and they will start to head this way. Fortunately for the Union Army, Gouverneur K. Warren is now personally down in the valley looking for more troops, and as surely as there's friction on a battlefield, there's also chance. Of the 51 brigades in the Army of the Potomac, he finds his old brigade, that day under the temporary command of Colonel Patrick Henry O'Rourke. And he says, "Patty, no time to lose." Patty looks at him and says, "Hey, brigade commander's in the wheat field. He kind of thinks I'm going to follow him today." And he'll say, "Patty, no time to lose." And with that, Patty O'Rourke will start his 140th New York, coming up the back side of Little Round Top. Cresting the top, he sees now Confederates spilling across the ledge in front of him. He'll draw his sword, yell for his men to fix bayonets, and then he'll run down the hill saying, "Down this way, boys." About the time that he gets over by those rocks over there, he'll be shot in the neck, and Patty O'Rourke will bleed to death right there, with Colonel Strong Vincent standing on top of the boulder, pleading from those men for Michigan, "Not one more inch, boys, not one more inch." 455 men from New York will come down, slam into the 4th and 5th Texas. There the lines will waver and shake until finally those Confederates will drift back down in the saddle between Little and Big Round Top. That secures this side of Little Round Top. And this is the best day of the American Civil War for Brigadier General Gouverneur K. Warren. He's now the savior of Little Round Top, and this becomes a Union island as the rest of the Union line starts to collapse under the weight of these Confederate attacks. Gary?
I'm not far away. Thanks so much, Doug. Awesome. Excellent. Why don't you hang on here for
Sure.
a second, because you just talked about some of the known heroes of Little Round Top. You know, you've got Joshua Chamberlain on the other side. You've got Patty O'Rourke. We've got Strong Vincent posting over there. But you called Warren the savior of Little Round Top.
Well, so this is what he's ultimately going to be faced. He is a staff officer. He has no authority whatsoever to order line troops to come to this position. It's not within his authorities. Yet knowing he has the great trust of George Gordon Meade, when he comes here, he recognizes the danger, and giving these orders and everybody realizing the import of this hill, they follow.
Good, good. And by the way, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're on Little Round Top, even though it's closed, with special permission from the National Park Service. We're here with Doug Dowds, Chris White. We've got Aaron from the West Point Museum. We've got Chris from the park and Sarah from the Trust. So we're all up here, and we've got some special stuff to show you. And we'll show you one of those two things in just a couple of minutes, and you're going to have to wait a little longer for the other one. But let's talk a little bit about the guns that are supporting the Union up here. I mean, why put cannons up here? This is Charles Hazlitt, of course. Some say Hazlitt. Up here, and his guns are up here. He's reluctant. It says, never mind that. Your guns will show that this hill is within our possession. Why put guns up on Little Round Top?
It's a really good question, and Warren will even tell both Captain Hazlitt and Martin, the 5th Corps Artillery Brigade commander, this is a crummy place to put artillery. First of all, you can't depress your barrels enough to actually go ahead and defend the hill, and to go ahead and get cannons up here, because there was no road, that they would have to be manhandled in place, worked around these boulders, and then, as artillerists would say, not a lot of dance space to maneuver these or work them. Ultimately, Hazlitt will say, the sound of our guns will encourage our own troops, and they will discourage the Confederates attacking. And surely there is a member of the 44th New York who says, never were there sweeter military music than hearing Hazlitt's guns.
That's excellent. And I've heard, the Confederates, they referred to Little Round Top as impregnable. They said it looked like a volcano, and that's in part because of all the, smoke from Hazlitt's guns. Now, I'll also say that, the people on Little Round Top, noted, on Devil's Den, noted when these guns were booming up here. So we have a temporal connection between Little Round Top and Devil's Den because Hazlitt's guns are indiscriminately dropping shells among the crest when the Union and Confederates are actually fighting around there. So we have a connection there as well. Now, I think what we're going to do now, or in just a second, is go up the hill a little bit. We might lose some connectivity. Don't worry, we'll be back if so. We'll know if we do as well. But before we do, real quick, you've mentioned some people that have some pretty great beards. Strong Vincent has the big mutton chops, and you've got Patty O'Rourke sort of has a Burnside thing going on. Look at Strong Vincent's chops there.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Patty O'Rourke. Look
I
at
mean,
that.
just look at that, okay? I'm bringing this up for a particular reason. Warren's got the mustache with just a little tuft under there. I'm bringing this up for a particular reason. I hate having long whiskers, but I've been growing them for a couple of weeks now for one particular reason, and that is for you all to vote what good or terrible Civil War facial hair I will shave this into on Sunday night, and then you'll get to see it sometime when we go live on Monday. So you want me to have the Burnside, the Lincoln, maybe the O'Rourke? You got to pick something I can actually do. I can't do like a Hancock. It just won't work. But put it in the comments, and if you don't want to participate in this trite exercise, you're welcome not to. Doug, anything to add?
No, so the only thing I would say is when we think about it, when Gouverneur K. Warren arrives up here, and we talk about the signal station being up here, the Signal Corps is one of the newest creations in the United States Army. It only becomes a bureau in 1863, although McClellan will start it. A guy named Albert Myers trains everyone. And what you see is the development, that 2 years in place now, and what you're going to see is almost 3 different groups of men who stand up here, and they have all kind of different levels of success while they are here. You can imagine for the first men get up here, it's actually Ariel Jerome. It's John Buford's signalman, who we usually think about and up on the cupola about this time on July 1st, 1863. The other people who come up here are looking out over the field, and of course it would have been difficult to go ahead and know exactly what was going on, but you can imagine when they see the Confederates and when James Longstreet makes his countermarch. One of the first reports from up here says, hey, the Confederates are moving to the right, which only reinforces Meade's fears that the Confederates are thinking about turning to the right. Now, ultimately, they would get the story right. They would give a message that says, hey, it looks like the Confederates have now turned Dan Sickles' left flank. This is one of the first warnings that this position might be in trouble. Of course, on July 3rd, we also know that they are up here. Although it's so hot for them, at this point, they're not using their wigwag flags anymore. They are reduced to having to send riders with any message they have because of all the sharpshooters down in Devil's Den that makes their job almost untenable.
Good, Doug. Thanks. And I'm seeing we've just crested 500 people watching live. Thanks so much. Make sure you share this with your friends as, again, we might lose some connectivity. Let's walk up the hill. We're going to introduce you to Aaron Rowland. He's with the West Point Museum. Chris White and I were up there recently. West Point Museum is great, incredible collection. They are rotating very well, and they allowed us access to their collections and actually brought some stuff down with us here. Now, we were talking about Charles Hazlitt here, and I'm just going to turn it over to Aaron, who's right off to Chris's left, to describe what incredible thing we have here.
All right, thank you, Gary, and thank you for everyone that's tuning in today. Of course, I would like to thank the National Park Service for allowing us up here in this amazing opportunity to bring some of these artifacts back up to their original locations 160 years later, at least where they were used at this point in the battle. But so we are standing, of course, here on Little Round Top. Now, I'd like to actually emphasize to Doug's point that he said about the artillerymen talking about this dance that they had to do around the rocks. Funny story, part of the curriculum before the American Civil War, cadets were actually taught and instructed how to dance. So on weekends, they actually had what they called hops, and they went and they hopped about and they did their dance. So many of them went, by the time they got here to West Point, were well skilled in dancing, at least those who were artillery officers educated at West Point. Now, of course, I would like to introduce something very special, very unique to our collections, and it is the guidon of Hazlitt's Battery D, 5th United States Artillery. Now, this particular guidon belonged to Battery D of the 5th United States Artillery. Now, initially, when the war began, the battery was known as the West Point Battery. The guns were used for instruction of the cadets, the Corps of Cadets at West Point. And then when in the winter of 1861, Battery D, the West Point Battery, was created, and when hostilities commenced that spring and into the summer before First Manassas, or First Bull Run, I should point out, they were redesignated as Battery D, 50 United States Artillery. They, of course, went on to participate in all the major battles of the 61, 62 campaigns of the Army of the Potomac, and various other armies that they were a part of. But this particular guidon is unique in that it's your standard cavalry guidon or artillery guidon when it comes to the red and the white. However, from there it goes on to be particularly unique. Now, this particular guidon was presented to the West Point Battery by the Empress of Austria. I don't dare try and pronounce her name out of respect for her memory and
Come
her
on,
legacy.
Aaron, give it a shot.
But it was presented to Captain Charles Griffin, who was then in command of the Battery D of the 5th Artillery. Of course, Griffin's going to go on later in the war and serve under our very own General Gouverneur Warren. So Gouverneur Warren being a Cold Spring native right across the river from West Point Factor. Now, when they come here to Gettysburg, this battery, as far as we're aware, this guidon will participate in all the major actions. So as you can see, it has seen some wear, tear, some early preservation efforts. So a lot of people ask, they ask the Gettysburg Foundation, they ask the Park Service, why don't we see oftentimes many more Union flags on display? That's because they're incredibly hard to preserve. A lot of these flags essentially are made out of silk. They're painted with gold flakes, and then they're just incredibly hard to preserve. So for instance, when we mounted this, it was vacuum sealed shut, so that way we could have it out on display. We can keep it from falling down and crumbling. Now, as you can see, if you look closer, you'll actually see some early preservation efforts that the quilting that are there holding the flag into place. So you'll see there's a lot of wear and tear throughout the years. It's faded. But because of those early preservation efforts, as much as we like to criticize them now because of the knowledge and understanding and technology and equipment that we have, we're able to even better preserve it. So thanks to those early preservation efforts, we still have many of these flags. So of course, this flag did belong to, later on, the captain of the battery, Hazlitt, or I should say Gary said Hazlitt. Now he's in command of the battery here. He is in command of these guns just off behind us here. And unfortunately, when his commanding officer Stephen Weed was mortally wounded, he is actually leaning over to hear what Weed is trying to say, and in the process, in doing so, Hazlitt himself is mortally wounded in the process. So a lot of West Point graduates were killed, wounded, etc. here on the summit of Little Round Top. So Gary, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks, Aaron. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're here with the West Point Museum and the National Park Service with special permission on Little Round Top while it's closed during the anniversary. We're about to get back to Chris. He's going to talk a little bit about that restoration and whatnot. We also have to talk about Gouverneur K Warren and the other incredible object that we have for you here today. One more thing about Hazlitt. You just described this story about Hazlitt and Weed, Hazlitt falling dead upon the body of his dying friend. Well, there's a good chance that it happened right on a rock behind you, right behind that cannon, which the park has protected during this restoration effort. And that rock was carved into no later than 1865, I think 1864, one of the first monuments at Gettysburg that says Hazlitt fell here commanding Battery D, 5th U.S. in battle July 2nd, 1863. And it says it over there. Unbelievable. And from what I can tell, we don't know who carved it exactly. I think it's about right, because supposedly it happened. Weed was hurt right near Hazlitt's rightmost piece, and I placed that piece right about there.
Well, West Point was an early innovator for collections and monuments, so I can say that much.
All right, good. Thanks so much, Aaron. We'll hear from
you
you in a second. And as we walk down the hill here, let's hand it over to Chris Gwynn. He'll have to fetch my mic in just a second here to talk a little bit about this restoration, because it's looking great to me.
Oh, glad to hear you like it, Gary. Thank you. Yeah, we've taken a lot of care and effort to try to do this right, so that when you come up to Little Round Top, you feel like you're at Little Round Top. And that involves a lot of things. And one of the things that it actually involved at this particular location is peeling back some National Park Service infrastructure that dated to the late 1950s, early 1960s. We call that Mission 66 architecture. And if Chris White can get off the boulder there, he can turn around, that one right there. So that boulder was actually covered by this big pavilion, this landing that the Park Service had created in the 1950s to provide a little scenic overlook. So you could get up on this platform, look out over the Valley of Death, Little Round Top. We had some interpretive signage there. And as the contractors were peeling back those 20th century layers, they found what they determined is boulder that they said was roughly the size of a Volkswagen, which is what you're looking at right now on the camera. That's actually 1863 topography. That's an 1863 boulder that we found beneath this park infrastructure. So now when visitors go back to Little Round Top, they're going to see something that had been covered up for the better part of 3/4 of a century that is now back on the landscape. One of the big questions we get, and we can kind of walk down the hill if you're able to, Chris. One of the big questions that we're getting with this project is, are you finding stuff? And the answer, of course, is yes. Archaeology is a huge component of the rehabilitation of Little Round Top. So anytime we do anything in the project area, that's the summit, all the trails, anywhere we're doing work, we have the park archaeologist and the contractor archaeologist team going out and doing an archaeological survey before we put anything in the ground. Before a shovel hits the soil, they're doing this work. And they're finding some tremendous things. And I think it's a bit of a reminder to us, how do we learn about the past? How do we learn about the battle? We have accounts like the one that Sarah read. We have images and illustrations like the ones you've been seeing of Warren up on top of the summit. But we're all kind of, as historians, working with the same stuff. There's not a whole lot that's really new. But I think archaeology, done correctly, done professionally, can offer us not just protecting the environment that we're working on up here, but it offers us a window into the past and the ability to learn something new about the battle. And this has been done at other National Park Service sites. I'll turn you to Little Bighorn out west that has been able to use archaeology to help inform the battle. And I think when all is said and done up here on Little Round Top, we may have the ability to do that here as well, to tell us some new things, to raise new questions perhaps. So for example, we were just talking about Hazlitt's Battery. Now when you go to Little Round Top today, you see the 4 guns that the War Department positioned right up at the very summit of the hill, along with the War Department marker, and this dates from the 1890s. Now, those guns are more illustrative right there. They probably weren't there during the battle because Hazlitt is going to use whatever natural areas he can find on the hill that allow him and his men to work those guns. As Doug was talking about that dance that artillerists have to do around the piece. Guns have to be able to recoil. Now, if those guns fired off a full round up on top of that hill and they recoiled, they're going to roll down the hill and probably crush Gary's car. So they probably weren't there at the time of the battle. But, for example, one of the things that the archaeologists have found up here are friction primers that the artillerists would have used to fire those pieces. And archaeology is all about spatial relationships. It's about where you find things in relation to one another on the hill. And after all of this is said and done, perhaps when that mapping is complete, it's going to tell us, maybe where those guns were. Maybe it's going to offer us a window into how far the 15th Alabama pushed up Vincent Spur, and a whole bunch of other things. Of course, most famously back in February of this year, the team discovered an unexploded shell just beneath us, kind of below where the 16th Michigan Monument is. And that's just a testament, I think, to how much is still out there on this battlefield. How much remains to be learned from the archaeological record. And of course, I'm also going to make my plug to be responsible visitors and stewards of the battlefield. If you see something on the landscape, leave it there. Tell the Park Service. Relic hunting is illegal on federal land. The archaeological record, it needs to be left intact for us to learn about it. But I think we can learn about it, and I think Little Round Top might be an example of just how we do that. And for that, let's head back to Gary here and to the statue of Gouverneur Warren.
I think that's just great. And we're about to bring on Chris White as well. So Sarah's going to grab the camera from him in a moment. But let me say that the Park Service's mandate, we know that they're supposed to accept visitors and whatnot, but protecting their resources is one of their main and most sacred mandates that they have of these historic sites. So let's support all those. It is painful to not be able to lead tours up here, but it is a great thing what they're doing up here. So we hope you enjoy. Now, Fast forwarding a little bit, after the Battle of Gettysburg, heroes are made. And it is more of in the last 60 years that Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine were really well known. Earlier, it was Vincent and it was Warren, Gouverneur Kemble Warren, with probably the most iconic statue on the entire, of maybe on any Civil War battlefield. So I see Chris getting some assets ready. That means he wants to talk about Gouverneur Kemble Warren. Chris White of the American Battlefield Trust.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks everybody for watching. We really appreciate your support. I want to thank Chris Gwynn for letting us come up here. I want to thank Aaron Rowland from the West Point Museum. Some of the pictures that you're seeing or have seen and will see are from a trip that Gary and I took up to West Point to check out all the cool artifacts that the West Point Museum is bringing out for us. So you're going to see some other images. You might see some selfies with me and Gary and Aaron up there. That was from a pre-shoot that we did up there. We're going to put those videos up in no time up on our YouTube channel at American Battlefield Trust. So I think one of the important things to talk about Little Round Top, and especially Gettysburg, is the memory of the battle. The memory here at Gettysburg is as much of a battle as were those 3 days in July of 1863. We're talking about Union and Confederates. Confederates fighting with Confederates. Union fighting with Union in the post-war years, about what actually happened here. And one of the more tragic figures is the hero of Little Round Top, Gouverneur K. Warren, or one of the many heroes of Little Round Top. You have men like Chamberlain, Strong Vincent, and of course Gouverneur Kemble Warren up here helping to save this part of the line. But Warren is a rising star in the Union Army. Warren is 33 years old at the time of the battle. He's a West Point graduate of the class of 1850, and he was went off to war at the head, or well, as a lieutenant colonel, and then at the head of the 5th New York Zouaves. He's also going to go on to a brigade command, and in February 4th, 1863, he takes over as chief topographical engineer of the Army of the Potomac. His entire budget was $1,500 to run his department, and he thought he was asking Joe Hooker, then the commander of the Army of the Potomac, for too much money. But Warren does yeoman service at Chancellorsville. He's all over the place. If you read his very flowery official report from Chancellorsville, he is going to tell you he was at the Chancellorsville Crossroads, at the Second Battle of Fredericksburg, back to Chancellorsville Crossroads. He's a rising star, and he's known a known quantity. On the outset of this campaign, he's about to get married on June 17th of 1863 on the way through Baltimore. He gets married to his wife, Emily, his fiancée, and then he comes here to Gettysburg, where he gains basically his fame. But from here on out, Warren's star starts to actually fade more than most people realize. Warren was offered the chief of staff of the Army of the Potomac. He turns that down. He wants Corps command. He'll get that Corps command after the wounding of Winfield Scott Hancock. He assumes command of 2nd Corps. And you can tell this 33-year-old know-it-all is going to be a know-it-all to the staff of Winfield Scott Hancock, because the staff's constantly going to write back, "Hey boss, when you coming back? When you coming back?" At one point, they brought Warren in October of 1863 for a poker game, and they got their commanding officer drunk. They took him for all he was worth, and then when he got up and stood out, went to stomp out, he said, "I want my money back." And they said, "You left the rank at the door, General. We're keeping your money." So Warren is this guy who is basically what I would describe today as manic depressive. He's high highs, low lows. Charles Wainwright probably said it the best. He has a screw loose and is not quite accountable for all of his little freaks. He was the chief of artillery of the 5th Corps. But he's on this rise. But as 1864 goes on into 1865, it's an ebb and flow with him. He has high highs and low lows. But on April 1st, 1865, he is, if you ask me, relieved of command by Phil Sheridan in a manner that was uncalled for. Little Phil Sheridan was within a few hundred yards of Warren at the Battle of Five Forks. He had this basically doomsday order from Ulysses S. Grant. If he's not doing his job, you relieve him of command. And that's what he does. Warren is going to be relieved of command, but stay within the Army, stay within the Union Army, and then the Federal Army. The reason he does so, he wants a court of inquiry. And that court of inquiry will play out in the early 1880s, and it's a veritable who's who of the American Civil War. George Custer from the grave writes in, or has a letter that's put in as evidence. You have Fitzhugh Lee, the future governor of Virginia. You have Phil Sheridan, who pretended like he didn't have anything to do with this whole fiasco, but ends up writing 200 little pamphlets about this entire fiasco of relieving Warren. Warren, unfortunately, on August 8th, 1882, will die. before the court of inquiry will exonerate him of all these charges and clear his name. When he's buried in Rhode Island, he will tell his wife, Emily, "Bury me in a plain black suit. I die a disgraced soldier." 6 years to the day after his death, this monument created by Carl Gerhardt for the cost of $5,000 is dedicated here at Gettysburg. It's the first New York general to have a monument here at Gettysburg, and it says everything you need to know. It says that these folks still stood with Gouverneur K. Warren. This was the height of his career. They reminded people that this monument here was that powerful symbol that Gouverneur Warren, even though he died a disgraced soldier, was here to do a job, and he did it well before his death and before his untimely demise as the commander of the Union Army's 5th Corps. There's other memory studies up here that we could talk about. We could talk about Oliver Norton, who is going to basically try to write Strong Vincent into the history books as the hero of Little Round Top. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain does a great job of himself doing that. Porter Farley of the 140th New York will do that for another West Point graduate class of 1861, Patty O'Rourke, who Doug Dowds pointed out was killed. I won't get into all these different details, but I just want to read one very short quote from Porter Farley. He corresponds with Warren, who lays out everything that happened up here in Warren's eyes. It'll change over time, like many of their memories do. But what he will say is one of the best descriptions of the fighting up here at Little Round Top, and this is mixed in with his trying to figure out what's actually happening. Farley said, "As we reached the crest, a never-to-be-forgotten scene burst upon us. A great basin lay before us, full of smoke and fire, and literally swarming with riderless horses and fighting, fleeing, and pursuing men. The air was saturated with sulphurous fumes of battle and was ringing with the shouts and groans of the combatants. The wild cries of the charging lines, the rattle of musketry, the booming of artillery, and the shrieks of the wounded were the orchestral accompaniments of the scene, like very hell itself, as terrific as the warring of Milton's friends in the pandemonium. The whole of Sickles' corps and many other troops which had been sent to its support to that ill-chosen hollow were being slaughtered and driven before the imperious advance of the Confederate corps commanded by James Longstreet. But fascinating and as terrible as this scene was, we had no time to spend upon it. Bloody work was ready for us at our very feet." What he describes is basically all the fighting going on down below, and the reason that those troops are up here to describe that is because of one man, and that's Gouverneur Kimball Warren. And his friends never forgot that, even though he felt in his death that the United States Army may have.
Stay up here, Chris, for a second, because we got some more to talk about here. Again, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're up here with the permission of the National Park Service. We're here at the West Point Museum, and Colonel Doug Dowds, a licensed battlefield guide. And we still have one incredible thing to show you. I want to say one more thing about Warren, because you've probably heard about this, Chris. You know, they erected this monument, became famous. There's a photographer stationed up here for a while, and people are going up, hopping up on the rock, posing with it. They damaged the binoculars, the strap that he has laying there. And eventually the park had to preserve it, and they tried to charge the Monument Association to do it. So one guy who was on General Weed's staff here at Gettysburg, a guy named Marvin, actually said, we know you cannot give us positive promise on the part of the government to protect the statue from injury and to repair it if it is mutilated. Yet if it was injured in the future, we would have a valid claim to have it repaired free of expense. Our association and the government would doubtless assume the responsibility. Okay. And he says, can we not dig out the earth around the rock so that it cannot be climbed by people who might harm the statue? That's right, proposing a moat around General Warren's rock. And instead of a moat, what we have is a sign there prohibiting you from going on that rock, the only rock on the battlefield specifically prohibited by sign from taking you up there.
It's amazing the changes on the battlefield over time, and I think that's a whole different story that we could talk about. Gary wrote an entire book, which he's not telling you about. It's called The Myth of Little Round Top.
I'm very humble.
You are very humble, sir. But it's a fantastic book. If you can find it, make sure that you buy it. It was actually one of my first introductions to Gary Edelman. I read that book cover to cover in one night. It was a fantastic read.
It's not as long as some other people's books. Thanks, Chris. Now, let me just ask you, too, because I think Warren is associated with some special objects. You see him holding his field glasses there, but there's some other special objects up on Little Round Top. Do any of them hold a candle to those particular field glasses? What other ones come come to mind on Little Round Top for important objects?
For important objects, we spoke about on the way up Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and his bent scabbard. I think that. I think Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain's mustache from the movie. That could be one. I think that's
John Pinkerton wants that.
He probably owns it. I'm surprised he doesn't. What else the riding crop of Strong Vincent, because he jumped up on top of the rocks as he saw the 16th Michigan start to fall back, and he will say something along the lines of "Don't give an inch." And he was wounded on one of the rocks behind the camera, and he forgot his sword on his horse and brought a riding crop along that his wife had given to him. I mean, outside of maybe the tubes of Hazlitt's guns, Hazlitt's battalion flag up there that we see there, maybe his Zouave uniform from my hometown of Pittsburgh. Those would be some of the things that
might hold a candle to Warren's field glass.
I think Warren's field glasses, especially because he's standing there holding it in Gerhardt's statue, he talks about looking through those field glasses specifically in a very long letter in 1872 to Horace Porter of the 140th New York. And I mean, he laid it all out there. He looked through his field glasses. He could see out there. And those are key to many officers, including Ulysses S. Grant, who had many pairs of field glasses and others, because you couldn't see far distances unless you got on top of a hill. And of course, you wanted binoculars to do so. That's what field glasses essentially are.
Great. And let's keep in mind a couple of things. Anybody ever standing on the Round Top and sees cars going down the Emmitsburg Road in the afternoon, you see the sunlight glistening off of the cars coming right toward us. By the way, one more thing. Chamberlain gets most of the love on Little Round Top in the Gettysburg movie, but General Warren's statue does appear in the movie. Some of the movie is shot from right down the hill there, looking up that way and looking down that way, portraying Big Round Top actually during the battle. Now, Chris, I think we're going to have you hand your microphone over to Aaron, because here we go. We got one more special thing to share. We've teased it for you already. Here's Aaron Rowland from the West Point Museum again. Aaron, you do the honors, please, sir.
All right. Well, thank you. It's good to be back once again. So before I get into what is arguably one of my favorite artifacts in the collection, maybe because of the nostalgia of the moment, but I would like to actually give a little bit of background on West Point and why Warren is here. So West Point actually was established in 1802 as the nation's first and premier engineering school. So cadets such as Gouverneur Warren would have learned and spent much of their time studying the art of engineering. So in fact, during the 1840s and 1850s, one of the core classes, part of their curriculum, was a course known as practical military engineering. They learned how to build fortifications, military bridges, pontoon bridges, using the period vernacular. So they learned how to build fortifications, and as we know, a lot of these notable engineers, such as Gouverneur Warren, will go on to build many of our nation's most notable fortifications, such as Fort McHenry, for instance. Now, however, Chris was actually talking a little bit more earlier about the memory aspect of Little Round Top, the American Civil War. And when we talk about our nation's memory, the memory of the Civil War, some of in my opinion, some of the saddest memories of that war actually come from General Warren. Now, General Warren was class of 1850. He came back. He graduated at 20 years old. He came back. He taught shortly before the war, and then he had a pretty meteoric rise throughout the American Civil War. So when he is promoted to the chief engineer of the Army of the Potomac, he is seemingly on the rise. He's going to go on to do great things, and of course, unfortunately, as Chris mentioned, there is that not so fond, not so good end of that story. But because his story, at least in his lifetime, did not end well, it was his daughter Emily, in fact. She took it upon herself to ensure that his memory did live on. So in the right around the turn of the century, 1900s essentially, she will donate many items from his collection to the West Point Museum. So the West Point Museum actually is the oldest federal owned museum in the nation, and we have the largest collection of artifacts owned by the United States Army, which include pieces that belong to General Warren. Now, selfish plug here. We'll be at Adams County this afternoon, starting at about 1 o'clock. And one of the artifacts that we have that belong to General Warren was that very sash that he's wearing in the monument and the photographs that you see. Now, Chris, you'd like to follow me down here. I've got one other item that is arguably my favorite. Now, we were talking about artifacts and memory. Now, what we have here, these Gary was talking about, are the field glasses, the binoculars as we know them today, that belonged to General Gouverneur Warren, and they are the glasses that he used right here on Little Round Top 160 years ago tomorrow. And when he would have been standing on these rocks behind us, these are the glasses that he would have used to look and spot the enemy from right here on top of Little Round Top. Now, unfortunately, these the field glasses have they've seen better days. They've seen very heavy wear and tear, the American Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg, and unfortunately, these will not be out on display again outside of the museum. Well, I don't see us ever doing it again because of the condition in which they're in. So you can actually look, you can see that they did have a leather case to them. The leather case is on display in the museum where we took them off temporarily for display to bring down to you fine folks and right here to Little Round Top. But unfortunately, you can see that the leather is starting to fall apart. They've come loose. So unfortunately, when we discovered this doing the condition report, we decided that this is the last time we're gonna bring these out outside the museum. So another plug for the museum: we are open from 9:30 a.m. to 4:15 p.m. from Tuesday through Sunday, and these will be on display for a very long time. So they're going to live in our collections. They're going to be out on display. So for those of you that might want to come spend the 161st anniversary with the West Point Museum, we encourage you to do so, and they'll be on display there. So fortunately for us here today, though, we've got artifacts from General Warren, and we've got these field glasses that I'm sure we're all going to kneel down and look through them because we're not going to be picking them up while they're up here. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
I just wanted real fast, I'm going to turn it over to Doug, but I'm going to pop up some pictures of some other Warren artifacts that they pulled from the case for us. His Zouave kepi as well as his sword when he was with the 5th New York. There's the Zouave kepi right there. His sword with the 5th New York, be prepared to be jealous. That's me holding it. And the scabbard, actually, you could see where the tip of the scabbard had been worn off from where he walked. Yeah. So it was really, really awesome. And those are some of the things you'll see in another video that we have from West Point. And, of course, they have on display right now, because they have rotating displays, the 5th Corps flag that was iconically in the background of one of the pictures with Warren in it.
Aaron, I got to ask, so first of all, what I heard was this is the last time these field glasses are ever going to be back up on Little Round Top.
It is, yep, it is.
Okay, that's spine tingling in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't meant to be a stump to chump, but do you know who manufactured these or where they came from?
If they're not already on there, which they're not, they'll be in our records on our, it's called ACAS, it's our historical property database, but I don't think we actually are aware.
Well,
of,
it's truly not meant to be a stump to chump.
Yeah.
My mind is just racing going, hey, American Civil War, we don't have enough weapons, we don't have enough anything. Yep. Now all of a sudden we need all these officers who are all looking for a set of field glasses. I imagine we reach out to the world and take as much of the world's stock of them as we possibly can.
Well, stay tuned. If I can, I'll get an answer, and I'll definitely share it with the world.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
Good. Hey, Aaron, we can't thank you enough for this. What a special experience. I'm kind of freaking out a little bit more than usual, I guess I'll say. So just unbelievable here. Now, I think we're going to wrap things up. We have a couple more things to say. First of all, Aaron mentioned that they'll have this and other objects out at the Adams County Historical Society on the afternoons of today, July 1st, and tomorrow, July 2nd. Go check it out. There's more there. We may have more out in the field before long as well. Also, make sure you vote for what good or terrible Civil War beard you want me to shave this into, if you care to, on July 3rd. And I'll hit it. I'm hoping for Fremantle in the Gettysburg movie. You got to pick something I can do. I could do that one. I could do Strong Vincent. I would love to do his mutton chops. So hit me with that. But of perhaps more gravity, I want to bring on Chris Gwynn as our last guest here to talk a little bit about, the park has a lot of things going on in the coming days in case you're in town, as well as, just to say anything you'd like to say.
Well, first, I remind you that we are doing a full slate of hikes, walks, talks throughout the next 3 days on the battlefield, and of course at the Museum and Visitor Center with our good friends, the Gettysburg Foundation, the very popular Sacred Trust lecture series. Those are all free. They're all open to the public. And the best way to really experience the battlefield is obviously to be here, to get boots on the ground, to walk this landscape where 160 years ago these two armies were fighting. Now, if you can't do that, we're so glad to be able to connect with you online through the American Battlefield Trust and the wonderful work they'll do. My hope is that next year, the 161st anniversary, we can all be on Little Round Top together. Joshua Chamberlain called this place the Vision Place of Souls. And he prophesied that this was going to be a place where generations that he never knew would come to this field to ponder and dream. And I think that's the power of Little Round Top. That's the power of being here with colleagues like Sarah, Chris White, Doug Dowds, Gary Edelman, Aaron, and even Melissa behind the camera taking photographs. Part of that work of taking care of this vision place is done by the Park Service, but the other part is done by our friends, the Gettysburg Foundation, our good friends at the American Battlefield Trust, and all of the supporters that help us take care of this special and singular place so that we can all meet here again for the 161st anniversary. Finally, I just want to thank Gary and team for allowing me to join them up here on Little Round Top on this special morning.
Thanks so much, Chris. And we have a West Point superintendent here, the superintendent, Steve Sims, who ultimately allowed us to come up here as a West Point graduate. So I'm sure General Warren would be happy with that as well.
I think he'd approve.
Yeah, good. And I want to, dedicate this outro in a way to everybody that's helping today. Also to one more guy, Rob Girardi, who is the biggest General Warren fan I know. And he would have given a much different take on General Warren's, experience and career, especially in the Overland campaign, but mostly to the soldiers who fought here, and that we are able to honor by protecting, preserving, interpreting, and educating the public about this park and these Civil War, Revolutionary War, and War of 1812 places. To everybody, to the West Point Museum for bringing these incredible objects, and we're not even done yet, to the National Park Service, and to the Adams County Historical Society, to Doug and Melissa for coming down here, and for you for watching and supporting battlefield preservation and education.